Hey everybody, I'm going to try recording this with my headphones in and see if I get a little bit better sound. It's been a little muffled on some of the recordings, but anyway, I thought today I'd talk a little bit about when I first met Buzz from the Melvins. I have quite a few stories about Buzz, and I probably knew him a lot better than I ever knew Kurt. As I said before, I pretty much was out of the scene for a bit, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, because I was off in college, whereas John was still down there in Tacoma and Seattle playing music. But from the early to mid 80s, I was there quite a bit and used to hang out with Buzz quite a bit as well. If you look in my YouTube history, you'll see a fairly recent interview I did with the Melvins. I was the Melvins Light, I believe, at that point, but Buzz and Dale are both there. And we talk a little bit about the early days, and I would hang out with him and stuff. We'll talk about that again when I talk about some of the other venues we used to go to. But this flyer you're looking at now, I believe, is the first time I met Buzz. And this is a pretty interesting show to talk about. So if you look at this is at the Graven Image in Seattle. And it's the Detonators, Melvins, DSML, and the Faction. But I'm almost sure this is the first time I saw the Melvins. It may have been the second time, but I remember first seeing that name and just it seemed like they were kind of unusual. Like, what kind of band is the Melvins? You know, when you have so many bands that are kind of have aggressive names, or Discharge, or Chaos UK. I mean, all these names that sound punk rock, and then you have the Melvins. So right out of the gate, they were kind of coming at things with a little different point of view. And I remember really liking them. At that point, they played really kind of a thrashier style. That very quickly became kind of a mixture of thrash and then really heavy, sludgy music, which of course a lot of people have said is really a lead-in to the grunge sound, if you want to call it grunge, which no one does that was around the scene for real. Anyway, something I remember about this show, if I remember correctly, is if I think this is the show that had a quarter pipe in essentially an old abandoned storefront. Quarter pipe was in the upstairs, and the downstairs was where the show was. So people were skating upstairs, and downstairs the bands were playing. And the place was pretty crappy. So downstairs, like pieces of the ceiling and stuff, I remember them, pieces of the ceiling like falling down, like little chunks of concrete and stuff falling as people would skate up above. I also remember there's this one little stairwell that led down to the downstairs, and that was the only way in and out of the downstairs where the show was being held. And if I remember correctly, the show got shut down by the fire marshals before the Faction and possibly DSML played. And I'm sure some people out there can give some clarification on how this went down. If this is the show I'm thinking of, it didn't take long for some of the punks to start a bonfire in the middle of the street and skate through the bonfire. And it became and it wasn't a riot per se, but it was definitely something to see. And if I remember correctly, and I don't know why Youth Brigade was involved, so I could be combining two different shows in my memory, but I thought the show got canceled and Youth Brigade played for free the next day at another storefront. Once again, I could be combining two shows, and my brother can probably chime in on this and give some details. I remember a day after one show, seeing Youth Brigade in the afternoon. And I remember meeting up with Youth Brigade before the show. They were hanging out at some like cafe or a coffee shop or something, and just talking to the dudes, the brothers from Youth Brigade, because at that point I was pretty into their first release. Anyway, this is just kind of a little introduction to how I met Buzz. I remember after seeing him, I really liked him. I remember talking to Buzz and immediately kind of feeling that connection of somebody who's really into music, who's a little out there, who's definitely got more going on than just the fashion side, the people that would be into it for fashion. Some people would go into the punk shows and just like they wanted to be there because it was cool. They thought it was cool or you know, different to like look like punk rock. But there was definitely a huge core of people who were really into the scene, really into the music, and really into just meeting other people who had like interests. And I remember with Buzz, I could talk to him about movies, I could talk to him about music, whether it was metal or rock or punk, and we could just talk for quite a while. Anyway, hope that gives you kind of an interesting start to the mentions of Buzz that will probably happen throughout some of my videos. Bye, guys.